First Timothy 4, verse 12 tells us to set an example for the believers in our faith. That means we're called to believe God for things. At Action Church, we believe for immeasurably more, not just enough. Now think about 2 Kings chapter 4 and the widow who had just lost her husband and was about to lose her 2 sons to the debt that they owed. So she went to the man of God. She went to the prophet Elisha and said, "Can you help?" The first question he asked her was, "What do you have? What do you have in the house?" Well, all she had was a flask of oil, a small container of oil. He said, "Take that, go into your home, send out your 2 boys and gather as many jars as you can to pour that olive oil into." So they did just that. They gathered jars, and the Bible tells us that as they poured out that oil, it filled every jar that they gathered. It filled it to the brim. God met them at the level of their expectation. They did everything they could by gathering those jars, and then God filled it. And we know if they would have gotten more jars, the oil didn't stop until the jars were full. If they would have had more faith, there would have been more oil and more jars full. I think about faith. I think about my grandmother who grew up in rural Alabama. For 50 years, she prayed for somebody that in her family that would become a pastor and do something great for God. Her just enough, the thing that she had, her flask of oil was just her faith. Her town was 200 people, not a whole lot going on, no money. She just had faith and prayer. But she believed God for immeasurably more. And when we launched Action Church, she stood in an auditorium full of people, 3 times the amount that were in her city. All she had was faith. And she collected some jars, and she put her faith in God's faithfulness, and God did immeasurably more, exceedingly abundantly more than she could ask or imagine. What does that look like for us? It means if you're struggling in your marriage, maybe it's time to put out some jars. Maybe it's time to go to counseling or open up those lines of communication. If you're struggling in your finances, you find yourself in a tough season, maybe it's time to build a budget and to begin to live frugally, gathering jars, doing all that you can do, and then believing God for immeasurably more. That's what we're going to do as a church. We are going to plan and we're going to do everything that we can. We are going to gather as many jars as we can because there are people in our city, there are people in our community that need Jesus. They need to be reached and connected. So we're going to do our job and gather jars as we start locations and as we build buildings and start new groups and take new ground for Jesus Christ. We're going to gather jars, and then we're going to do what the Bible says. We're going to do what Ephesians 3:20 states, and that as we put our faith in God, we're going to believe Him to do immeasurably more than all we could ever ask or imagine.